Good evening, everybody. Today is February 9th, 2026. The time is 5:42. And I would like to call the Providence School Board meeting to order. Today is a workshop with the Council of Great City Schools. Madam Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Corey Jones,
Present.
Stephen Williamson,
Present.
Najee Mahingabu,
Present.
Andrew Branson, Jenny Mercado,
Present.
Mireya Mendoza, present. Heidi Silverio, present. Angel Newman, present. And Tyrell Stevens.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Before we get into today's agenda, we're just waiting on our coach from the Council of Great City Schools, but I think it would be good if we could in fact do some quick introductions on today. We have a new school board member that replaced Melissa Hughes in Region 1, Mr. Andrew Branson. Love for you to introduce yourself, and I'd love for some of us to go around and introduce yourself as well and how long you've been on the school board. But let's start with Mr. Andrew Branson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be with you all. My name is Andrew Branson. I'm the new Region 1 board member. Was just sworn in on Friday, and so nothing like starting my first day with being with all of you. I've been a resident of Providence for almost 25 years and been a PPSD parent since 2009. I have a son who's a junior at Classical, so I'll be with PPSD for at least 2 more years. And during the day, I run Onward We Learn, which is the state's largest college access and success program. Used to be known as the College Crusade. You might know it from that name. And so we work with over 1,000 PPSD students, middle school and high school. And I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to work with all of you, doing really important work. And so thank you for the warm welcome that I've gotten so far.
My name is Jenny Mercado. I'm in the board since last year. And I'm happy to be with the mayor, and I am happy to serve my community and everything that we're doing on the board and shape our kids' future. And I'm a mom of twins in Classical.
Dr. Javier Montañez, going this way?
Yeah.
Dr. Javier Montañez, superintendent, been in the district for 30 years. Parent, grandparent of students and ex-students. Continue to do the work to continue moving the district forward. That's our goal and our vision. So.
Zach Scott, Deputy Superintendent of Operations, so oversee HR, Finance, and Operations, and also PPSC Parent Program Assistant.
Lisa DiMartino, newest member of the PBSC team, chief of staff. We know each other from my work at the Rhode Island Foundation now. So good to see you.
We introduced each other earlier. Paula Dillon, Deputy Superintendent of Academics. I've been with the district for 2 years now, and I'm really excited about driving student outcomes forward.
Martha D. Melendez, manager to the superintendent and school board, have been with the district for 34 years.
Maria Mendoza, I'm on the board for this year, and I'm really glad to be. It's nice to share with all my colleges, very nice people, very respect, nice, everyone wants each other, it's very respected. I love that, and I'm glad to be a part of this school board.
Heidi Silverio. I was a student at PBSD, and now I have a daughter who's going to be a future PBSD. So I've been here basically all my life. And I was an assistant teacher at PBSD for a little bit. And I went to law school, and now I'm back trying to get back to my community. So here we are. It's been here for a year.
Hi, Andrew. Hey, everybody. I'm Angel Newman, Vice President of the school board. This is my second year on the school board, and I came by way of the arts community. I'm director at AS 220. I've been there for over 20 years and do a lot of work with young people, the arts, creativity, design frameworks, and justice-oriented work. And so just those connections between art and education and justice are like where work lives and thrives. This is the school board with perfect fit. So yeah, I'm happy to be here, and it's really cool to see you on the board and look forward to working with you.
Tyrell Stevens, School Board President. Just completed my 5th year in the school board. Corey Jones, your other colleague on the east side. Yeah, my day job, I do workforce policy, so anything from federal workforce, WIOA, to state workforce dollars, real jobs. And yeah, just happy to bring my skills in whichever way possible. And this is going on my 2nd year on the school board, so excited to work with you and connect, one-on-one.
Absolutely. Steve Williamson, we just met. I have been on the school board for 1 year. I also represent Region 5 with President Stevens, and I have some educational experience at the college level. So I've taught political science, political theories, and other stuff along those lines over the years. I currently work in public health, and yeah, that's probably it.
My name is Naijin Muhingabo. I chair the Health and Wellness Committee. I've been on the school board for 4 years now. I joined because I was inspired. I wanted my community, especially the Region 4, the parents to have a well-settled child education. And on my day job, I do refugee advocacy, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Sidney, are you able to introduce yourself really quick?
I sure can. Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Ellsburn. I am the Manager of Government Services and a governance coach for the Council of the Great City Schools. Happy to meet you new board members and happy to see everyone else again, at least the ones I can see from where I'm sitting. So happy to be with you this afternoon, evening.
Thank you.
I'm in Iowa, so it's still a little bit afternoonish for me.
Sounds good.
Yes.
I would like to approve the agenda. Just before I do, Sarah, can you please introduce yourself?
Good evening, I'm Sarah Rapport, legal counsel to the board. I'm sorry I'm a little late.
Oh, it's okay. AJ's not here today. I would like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda on today. Do I have a motion? Motion's been made by Chairman Jones. Do I have a second? Second's been made by Chairman Mahibu. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion, any noes, any abstentions? The motion passes. I would like to move over to items 3.0, working session, 3.1, monitoring calendar training with Council of Great City Schools. Yes, we'll turn it over to Sydney to lead us through this morning.
Well, and it looks like AJ has joined us.
Show a little face so AJ knows I'm here.
I was wondering about that one.
Welcome. Do you all have a copy of the effective goal monitoring document?
Yes.
Excellent. So this evening, the purpose of our time together is just to start getting folks prepared for when you actually can engage in goal monitoring. And so we'll do we'll walk through the purposes and intentions of goal monitoring tonight. This is your opportunity to ask all the questions you have, dig into that. And then you'll be able to actually practice. So before we leave, you actually get some hands-on, because as we dive into the work for real, as your support team, we'll be here to help provide feedback and support as you all do this in real time. But tonight is just opportunity practice. So the first thing I want you to do is pull up your document. Document. And take a moment and just silently to yourself, read that first section, is what is goal monitoring. So take a moment and read that first section, just that section. Don't go into how is goal monitoring beneficial. We'll come to that. But just take a moment and read that first section. What is goal monitoring? And then after you've had a chance to read it, we'll talk about it. What's something that jumped out at you about what is goal monitoring? What's something that jumped out at you? Who's the first to share? Yeah.
It's looking at data, reviewing data, find out what the next steps are, but making sure that we have agreed upon goals that we can work on, achievable goals. So we look at the goals, review the data, depending what data says, then we can make a plan for what comes next.
Yeah, so this is an important part of monitoring. Monitoring is just one major component in a continuous improvement process. So it assumes that you have goals, so you know what you're trying to continuously improve on. You get data, it tells you whether or not you continuously improve. And you talk about, okay, so what's the next step? Where are we going from here? What's the plan to continuously improve? Who else? What jumped out at you about what is goal monitoring? Who'll be the next to share?
I can share something. Sorry, I'm off screen. But the point about initiatives and programs and silver bullets, how there are so many of them, because I feel like we all feel what the issue is and we all feel what the problem is. And so we try to throw as many solutions at it without realizing what is working, what is not working, and giving time for those solutions to work. So goal monitoring kind of gives you a measure of what it is instead of throwing the whole kitchen sink at a problem.
This is a real challenge across school systems nationwide. Is just this idea of initiative fatigue. Like, staff feel completely run down, boards feel overwhelmed. It's like, well, hold on, this is something brand new every week. Part of the intention of monitoring is to bring some discipline that says we're not going to play for silver bullets. We're not going to, change it up every 15 minutes. Like, we're actually going to look at data. Like, this isn't just based on vibes. This is based on what is the evidence the kids are actually getting what they deserve. Yeah. Who else? What you notice about what is goal monitoring? Yeah.
I would add to I think Heidi's point that additionally, like, if you're the only way you know something is working is if you don't change too many things at once. If you change one thing and you see a dramatic change, you could reasonably attribute that to the change that you made. If you start changing something, like if you just, I think there's a tendency, especially like I know when I came on the board as a new board member, I want to fix everything all at once, and you have to like rein that in and be like, that's not how reality works. We have to fix one thing at a time. And if you're changing too much all at once, and constantly changing things, and you never have any basis to determine whether or not you can't reasonably infer that anything is changing because of what you just did, because you just did 12 different things at once. So if anything's working, and if it doesn't just cause complete chaos, you wouldn't even know what actually caused the change because you're changing too much, too fast,
Yeah, one of the things that you're going to see as we dig deeper into this work of goal monitoring is you're going to see a insistence on data that is predictive. You've already had this conversation when you were looking at your interim goals and interim guardrails, like to what extent are they predictive of the goals of the guardrails? But that same predictive quality plays a major role in monitoring, for exactly the reason you described, is that we have to have some way of evidencing what's working, what's not working. Who else? What jumped out at you regarding what is goal monitoring?
I was just gonna say, hi AJ, hi Cindy, it's Angel over here. I think one of the things, Steve, that you just made me think about, it makes me think about when you're tested for allergies. You know what I'm saying? And you kind of have to do the process of elimination. And if you're just like changing your diet completely, you're never really gonna figure out like what you're allergic to. It kind of feels that way, like in terms of switching out strategies and moving too much at one time, you don't really know what you're measuring at a certain point, and so you can't solve it. And so I think that last line about like, it's only catastrophic when there's not aggressive strategies to help growth like prevail, right? That like we have a lot of room to like make improvements, but we have to be aggressive and intentional about the strategies. Just like if you were going to the gym, you can't just like wish that you're more fit. You have to like actually do things, do you know what I mean? And then monitor your progress to see if it's working.
Absolutely, absolutely. Anybody else? Things that jumped out at you about what is goal monitoring before we transition?
I just appreciated the idea that it is a conversation between the board and the superintendent to ensure that we have alignment and that we're working toward the community vision toward those goals.
Is there anyone else?
I'll go. We haven't met AJ. I'm Andrew Gramson. I'm the new board member, so nice to meet you.
Welcome to the team.
Thank you. I think what jumped out to me is, and I'm like literally like showing up like the day of the exam, so I'm really mindful of all that. But it talked about the alignment between the community's vision for student outcomes and then the reality. And so you might have all spoken about this, but I was really drawn to the fact that we're talking about the community's vision for student outcomes, which means that we don't get to change the goals later on because they're not matching to the reality. And so because if the community's vision is really set, that is really the North Star from which we are operating from. And so that really struck me as part of this process.
So you mean just because you're brand new to the board doesn't mean we should change all the goals?
I know better than that.
Yeah, you do, and that's fortunate for your colleagues, but that's not every board member. We run across a whole bunch of folks like, look, I've been here for 15 minutes. We need to change the strategic plan. We need to change the goals. We need to, like, we going from 2-ply to 3-ply. I mean, like, they got a whole plan, for what everything needs to change. But you're right. The point that you make is this school district doesn't belong to any of you. It's not about any of you. The school system belongs to your community. You are simply representatives of the community, but it's not your school district. It's the community school district. So it's not your vision that you're representing. It's your community's vision that you're representing. And so that the beautiful thing about that is it does bring some stability. So even if we change the superintendent, even if we change a board member, that doesn't mean the goals change because the goals are reflective of the community's vision. And so we're going to keep marching toward that. And just because I'm brand new doesn't mean everything changes. We don't have this initiative of the day just because the humans change. If we want to change the goals, great. But that means we got to go back to the source. We got to go back to the listening and engage again before we start changing up, because that's where the goals and guardrails came from. They came from the community. So if when it's time to change them up in 5 years, you have to go back to the community. It's not just what Facebook said. No. That's not how this works. So this is a little bit about what is goal monitoring. I want you to take a moment and look at the 4 bullets under how is goal monitoring beneficial? Like, why would you spend? Because under our coaching, you're going to spend a lot of time, literally half of your time each month, monitoring progress towards your goals. So there has to be a reason that you would invest so much time and energy. Take a moment and read through how is goal monitoring beneficial. Then we'll talk about it. Why is it beneficial? Yeah, talk to me. Why is it beneficial? Yeah, hop in.
So one thing that stuck out to me was lead by example. And my fiance is a behavior analyst, right? So she's always like comparing it to the kids at work. She's like, they're gonna mimic the behavior that you guys bring. So if you go up there and you make it about the students and not about adult behaviors and not about, who, is clicked up with this group or fighting, so-and-so on this issue, that eventually the people who come to the board meetings, the, greater community will start mimicking, or as she says, modeling your behavior. And so that's what stuck out to me is that I think even as far as we've gotten so far, it's like at first, people reach out to me about any odd thing. And now people are reaching out to me like, hey, I see you guys did these goals and guardrails. Why not 100%? Then I'll explain to them, okay, you can't move it 100% overnight, but the conversation is changing, the dialogue is changing, and people are starting to model the behavior change that we've exhibited. And I think that that's kind of a key benefit is that, if we want teachers to have autonomy, we have to give the superintendent autonomy, right? But then if we want teachers to be held accountable, then we have to hold the superintendent accountable, right? And how do you balance those two things? And so when we balance that right, then we're going to make it easier for the rest of the district to be able to balance that right as well.
Yeah, the way that we often say it is that what happens in the boardroom echoes in the classroom. Is that if we want whatever culture we want in the classroom, part of the board's access to creating that is to model that culture in the boardroom. And so if the culture that's modeled in the boardroom is a dumpster fire, well then don't be surprised, if some folks are modeling down the classroom. But if the culture that the board models in the boardroom is, hey, you know what, we're gonna be focused on student outcomes, then that gives permission to everyone up and down the entire organization to be like, no, there's this other adult drama over here, but we're gonna be focused on our students actually learning today. That is part of how the board begins to influence the culture and climate of the organization. Who else? Why is goal monitoring beneficial?
It's focused on student outcome. So as I always say, nucleus is and always will be students. So it's always focusing on student outcome. And then when as superintendent, I or my designee will be reporting out based on what data, looking at data, following data, making sure whether it's good, then we'll share that. But if there's an issue, let's not shy away from it and let's say, okay, there's an issue here. This is not having the impact that we want. So now how are we going to address that or realign the work that we're doing to address that so it can get the outcome that we're looking for?
Yeah, this is a challenge that the board is uniquely positioned to address. First, you make a clear stand that the reason the school system exists is to improve student outcomes. And then you don't just say it, but you live it. And the more that the board lives it, the more that you really free up the entire organization to make that the focus. Because there's always going to be competition for other things that people want to have be the focus. That's always going to be the case. That's never going to go away. The question is, what is the cultural norm that you're creating? Is the cultural norm that children always have pride of place in the school system, that their needs are always being focused on and addressed first? Or is it something else? And that is part of what the board says. How you spend your time matters. When people see you spend the majority of your time at a board meeting talking about what are the colors of the football uniforms and cheerleading uniforms, and should we have this type of tractor or that type of tractor, like when people see that's what you spend your time on, what people infer from that is, oh, okay, well, these are the things that matter most. And that goes for really important things as well. If you spend 100% of your time talking about the finances, what people will infer from that is these people care more about dollars than they do about children. And that's not to suggest that having a conversation about the dollars isn't important. Our coaching just isn't, you wouldn't do that 100% of the time. If you spend half of your time each month really digging into, are our children actually getting the blessing of education that we owe them? And then half of your time spent talking about all the other things that you all feel like you need to invest your time in. You just wouldn't spend 100% of your time ignoring our children actually learning. Anyone else? What do you notice about why goal monitoring matters? Or rather, how it's beneficial? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think communicating expectations is a big thing, both for the reasons that you just said. Allows you to center student outcomes, but also, I just think organizationally, the school district is already going to be facing enough chaos and flack and noise from outside, given the political environment, the financial environment, just there's like always going to be stuff coming down the pipe. We shouldn't do anything to generate more chaos inside. And having clear expectations that have been communicated, it allows everybody to do their jobs and function in an environment where you're not like suddenly going to get strung up by your heels by the school board because of something that somebody just pulled out of a hat. You know what I mean? It's going to be that there's, I just think that's institutionally, I think it's very difficult for any institution to function if you don't have clear expectations and guidance. So.
Yeah, the clarity of expectations is absolutely essential. It lets people know here are the things that are going to matter most. And one of the things you'll do to enforce it, is we'll get further into this conversation tonight, is what you all celebrate clarifies what the expectations are. And so think about board meetings, like which things have we been celebrating? Have we been celebrating that this particular group of students grew and relative to the goals, or have we been celebrating, that the football team won a championship? And that's not to denigrate the football team winning a championship. People love that. But the question is that one of your goals? Because if people see that the thing that we celebrate most is the football team won the championship, then what people look first, that's the thing that matters the most. So if we want to be pleasing to the school board, that means we got to focus all our time on football. But when people see that you are celebrating your expectations relative to the goals, then people look, oh, okay, well, wait a minute. If we want to be celebrated by this board, we actually have to make sure that we are causing improvements of what students are able to do relative to the goals. That is so much what clarifying expectations really accomplishes, because it makes it really clear. This is what we celebrate. This is what we value. This is what we're going to put our resources into. Anyone else before we transition? Anything else jumped out at you about how is goal monitoring beneficial?
I was just gonna say, I think that it's also like a mechanism to practice transparency with community, where it's not just about setting goals that sound nice and putting them on paper and then letting them collect dust, but it's an actual, like, transparency is not just a innate thing, it's a practice. And so by monitoring goals monthly, in this way, we're practicing transparency so community can really see the goals in action and their vision enacted with that.
Yeah, just to add to what you were saying, what I really liked is the whole notion of like the report should be at a 6th grade level, because our 6th graders, if they're interested, they should be able to come to our meeting or watch a meeting and know what's going on in their school. Anybody in the community, just making sure that the information is not only transparent but accessible to our community. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, some of my favorite board meetings have been when some 3rd graders who started below grade level at the beginning of the school year in literacy and jumped up 2 grade levels would come to the board meeting, to collect their certificate and be praised by the school board, but they want to take the mic and explain it to us. I'm like, look, girlfriend, come on up, like whatever you need to say. And they would, and they come up and explain, hey, look, here's how I grew, here's what my teacher did to help me, here's the strategies I used, and that's a powerful, powerful thing when you can have more and more voices at the table having a conversation about how are our children learning, including our children. And so, having that transparency is an important part of the journey. Any other reflections before we transition? All right. So then the next thing that we're thinking about, very briefly, and I'll pass the baton to Cindy because she knows this topic, is effective monitoring calendars. So go ahead and read that section about effective monitoring calendars, and then we'll come back and talk about it for a second. Why is this important? That's what you want to be thinking about. Why would we have a monitoring calendar? Why is this important? We'll talk about it in just a moment.
right. What are you all noticing about effective monitoring calendars? I'm hearing feedback. AJ, I'm not sure if my, oh, there we go. Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, what are you noticing about effective monitoring calendars? Besides, it's a mouthful to say it. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, it looks like it's a really kind of close, kind of planning process between the superintendent, staff and, the board, because in order for us to be able to make an effective calendar, we have to understand when the data is available. But then also, there's still the board, very much is responsible for this, responsible for the outcomes. And so, we have to have a close role in ensuring that we're going to be able to meet our monitoring requirements and expectations, while also working with the superintendent to ensure that we're putting things at the right time and, when the data is available.
Yeah. So making sure that, one, the board owns the calendar, so that, because it is your, it will be your monitoring calendar. However, in close collaboration with the superintendent to understand when the data is available. What is another reason that the superintendent needs to be such a close collaborator in that process? Aside from just knowing when the data is available, what else do they need to do or know in order to make that a valid calendaring process or an effective one?
I mean, if there's a case that a specific goal doesn't have a comprehensive tool for collecting data yet, that tool and that strategy for collecting data will need to be created by the time that goal is up for monitoring. Like, I'm thinking about our goal 5, right? Like goal 5, we know it's under development, we voted it intentionally in that way. And also, there's going to be tools that need to be created to effectively measure that data.
Right. Yeah. So they're going to know the information about creating those tools, and they're going to need to, and specifically with the goal you're speaking of, part of that process will be keeping the board up to date on when that expectation might be met as far as having a measuring tool. What about the data and its availability? Go ahead.
Yeah, the superintendent has to provide us these presentations ahead of time, has to allow the board the time to be able to consume that information before it's presented at the board meeting. And ultimately, it's the superintendent who's going to be presenting and kind of putting these presentations in front of the board. So I think that's kind of a huge role in us working together in this calendar.
Yeah. So what are they going to need to do? You're going to need it ahead of time, but what is the superintendent and their team going to need to do with the data before they get it to you to review? Yeah, they're going to need time to analyze it. So that effective monitoring calendar needs to be built with the idea of not just when the data is available, but when the superintendent and team will have had time, and usually will coach somewhere 30 to 60 days from when the data is received to actually unpack that data and go through the process of understanding why the data says what it says, so that they can report it to you in a meaningful way. What else are you noticing about effective monitoring calendars?
I feel like we kind of heard that this was coming. We were going to have this training. We kind of knew that we were going to create a calendar. And so I had expectations in my mind of like what that would look like. So it was surprising to see that on our calendar, we have to not only include just monitoring, but the board training, community trainings, I did not think that was gonna be on our monitoring calendar in general. So it's interesting to think, not only is it monitoring goals, but also when are we gonna have all this extra stuff on our calendar?
Yeah, so we encourage that it include all of those other things as well. What might be the benefit of including all of those things?
Transparency.
Transparency?
Also distribute the workload reasonably, so like if we have if we have a period where a bunch of reports on goals are due, and there's a heavy lift around that maybe, and there's a few there's a couple of months before that where we're gonna have some downtime, maybe that's the time to schedule in our board evaluations or other things.
Or even if there's a specific goal that might be coming up that maybe we need a little bit more training on how to understand, or what are we gonna do with that data, it's good to know that in advance so we can get a training schedule, so we know what to do with that information, how we can take that information in.
Yeah.
And the same for the community, maybe the community sees a goal and they're like, hey, I don't know why this goal isn't 100%. Let me go to this community meeting, let me go look at, what happened in this board meeting. Hey, Heidi, why isn't this goal this high, right? The community will be able to kind of weave together the work that we're doing and, bring their perspective of what's happening in the board meeting to our community meetings. And then again, have those conversations about the items that are most important rather than, the bus routes.
You're also looking at the frequency and the duration of the information that's coming. So it gives you the opportunity to work together and look at what the outcomes are.
I didn't quite hear that response. If you could.
So it's also looking at the frequency, how often we're working on them. So the calendar is going to help you plan at the frequency and how the duration of all the information that's coming in. So it's not an overload. So we're planning correctly. So it doesn't become a tedious or an exhausting job. It becomes a little more frequent, so we can actually say, this is what we're looking at, this is the goal that we're looking at, and then looking at it, the goal is a 1-year goal, a 3-year goal, or 5-year goal. So how are we going to look at that information, all the data that's coming in, so we can actually say when we're going to be touching base on this to show if there's growth or need of adjustments.
Yeah, so frequency helps the understanding when those reports are going to be coming, when those adjustments might be made. And then, talking about all of the other items, you all gave good rationale about why those other items would also be included on your monitoring calendar. Those are all of those other things, the board trainings, the board-led community trainings, the listenings, self-evaluation, that is, all of those things lend to your board work, which, if you remember, board work is anything that the board has established through goals and guardrails, and then anything legally required. So knowing when those statutory votes happen, and then it all becomes part of your continuous improvement process. So it really encapsulates all of the primary work that the board has committed to in its endeavor toward becoming more student outcomes focused.
Cindy, can I ask a question?
Certainly.
So I definitely have a great appreciation for having the calendaring out of the monitoring. Talk to us a little bit about what happens, because I'm sure it does happen. What happens when the data isn't far enough along, or the analysis that you want isn't far enough along? What is that sort of that push and pull of deciding it's better to go ahead with partial data and partial analysis to stay on track versus tabling it and deferring it, and then sort of the cascading effect of allowing yourself to just sort of put things off? Talk to us a little bit about how you see that playing out.
Yeah, and I think actually that you're foreshadowing what we're going to get to a little bit as we continue through this document, because there is there are some guidelines that we do have around, whether, what we don't want is incomplete data in a monitoring report. And I would say incomplete is different than data that isn't where we want it to be. So, the expectation would be that the board is going to monitor according to the monitoring calendar and receive monitoring reports, which perhaps we need to get into that next section and just keep moving in order to answer your question. Is it all right if we do that? Okay, great. Before we do move on, any other comments or questions on the effective monitoring calendar piece? Adrian?
The only thing that I'll add is that it is a sign of maturity of a school board when the board gives up on gotcha games with its administration. And so what an immature board wants to do is, we will tell the superintendent tonight what we want to monitor on Wednesday night. And then, gotcha. And if you're not ready, well, then now we're going to expose you. But this is immaturity. The mature board says, actually, what we really want is valid, accurate information. And valid, accurate information doesn't come from springing requests from people. It comes from making sure the staff knows far, far in advance, here's exactly what we expect, and here's by when we expect it. And so it allows the board to have an authentic form of accountability. Because what the immature gotcha behavior, underneath it, what it really does desire is some form of accountability. It just thinks that by playing games, that's how you get it. The real way you get accountability is you let people know exactly what to expect and by when you expect it. And then on that date, you have that conversation. A monitoring calendar, it enables that level of accountability. Not having a monitoring calendar and then just trying to make it up on the fly doesn't actually create the accountability that the board's desire. But that takes us to the next piece of the puzzle, which is effective monitoring reports. So when the calendar says we're going to talk about math, the superintendent's going to have to bring you a report that says, here's the goal that you have around math, and here's where we are right now. But that monitoring report has to have certain elements to it for it to be useful to you as a board. Take a moment and review the section about effective monitoring reports. Then we'll talk about it.
All right, what are you noticing about effective monitoring reports?
I mean, one thing for me is, does it clearly show the target reporting periods, annual targets and deadline targets? I think, sometimes you look at data and you're like, relative to what, right?
Yeah.
And, it's a lot easier when you're able to say, okay, we're 0.5% or 3% or 5% from where we want to be, and, then we're able to ask those more critical questions. And then lastly, the other thing that stuck out to me is, the answer to any of these is no. Hand the report back to the superintendent and have them completed before proceeding. So there's a level of accountability for us if a presentation that, is an effective monitoring report, hits the agenda, right? We have a role in ensuring kind of quality control before we even allow that to be reviewed.
Yeah, so that's that incomplete data piece that we were talking about a little bit earlier. There is an expectation for the report to answer those questions before the board would proceed. So the superintendent, you have that information so that when you're developing those monitoring reports, you know what the expectation is, and then board, that would be, you would also, use that lens to review it, and if, as it says right there, proceed it, push it to the next meeting if any of those questions are answered no. And that doesn't mean it's the gotcha governance that AJ talked about. It means that we need to have a report that actually can spur that conversation that you want to have, that we've been talking about. Who else? What stands out to you in the effective monitoring reports section?
I really like the number 4, where it talks about systemic causes and strategic responses. I think that keeps the picture big and, as it says, systemic versus like, oh, this one school isn't working out. This, this group, or this, you know what I mean? But like, it causes, again, as Corey said, accountability on our side, the superintendent's side, and district side, to keep a systemic lens, therefore a strategic lens, so that way we're looking for patterns and not isolated situations of failure or success.
Yeah, looking for patterns versus isolated situations of failure or success. Thank you.
One of the trends that I'm also seeing across this report that we have here is that no matter what we're doing, and we're going back to data, because see, data dictates everything that we do. So every time we go back to data, we're going to show we usually do a 3-year trending. Here we can do what it looks month to month or reporting to reporting cycle. But it also, at the end, it keeps asking us, what are the next steps? So not only are information is coming in and you're not rich in information, but you're using that data to set the next steps. And that's one of the most important things that we need to do as we continue to improve, is what's coming up next, and what do we expect to see at the next report. And I like the fact that it keeps saying with the bar graphs, and it's looking at stage 1, when the first reporting date, this is what we at. And then from there, you start looking at a 2 or 3, I say year, because that's the way we do it, but 2 or 3 year cycle of how we improving, or throughout the year, when we're going throughout the year, that we're reporting out on those cycles, how are we improving or not?
Yeah. Are we improving or not? And as you mentioned, what are those next steps? And to know those next steps, you will have had to have, as we said, unpack that data and figured out the what and the why things are the way they are, and then be able to plan or pivot or continue on the path that you have set. And then part of that, any needed next steps, and it says the evidence and the plan. What are those next steps, and what is your plan for getting us back on track? And when might we be seeing those numbers changing the way your plan is telling us that they're anticipated to change? So all of those things.
I have a question.
Certainly.
So, like, when I think about the target data, right, like, where should we be at this point? I also think about, like, the data of the intervention, is it normal for, one of these presentations to also say, this is where, the data says this intervention will bring us, right? Along with our own kind of targets. Obviously, you can't look at another school and do it exactly, get the exact numbers, right? But, usually when I worked in the DUS office, they'd always say to show me what Massachusetts and Connecticut are doing. And, that would always be like a key point, is like, have other districts done it successfully? How successful was it? And, will we be able to see that same level of success, or do we have a different demographic that makes it so we might see half or 80% of what they saw?
Yes, so if I'm following what you're asking there, I think as far as whatever the strategies are or planned, there would need to be some amount of evidence provided by the superintendent that they would be anticipated to work, or if when the superintendent and team are analyzing the data and they're finding out that something is happening, working well in a school, when they analyze that and go to figure out what is working here, what they might realize is that this is what we need to double down on, or really this is the type of work that we do need to duplicate throughout the district. AJ, do you have anything to add to that question?
Yeah, I know you all probably can't see my screen very well. But just as a quick, to connect the dots for you, just as a quick reminder, the first step in this process is the outcomes, and specifically the student outcomes. And you all go out to the community, you listen to the community's vision for student outcomes, for what students should know and be able to do. And you all, as a board, have adopted that as a set of goals. And on the screen, I have one example of what a goal looks like, but you all have your own goals. This is just an example from the district. Once the board has done that, then next the superintendent steps up. And once the outcomes have been identified, next the superintendent identifies the outputs. Where the outcomes are, what do we want students to know or be able to do at the end of the cycle? The outputs are, how will we know in the midst of the cycle if we're actually making progress toward the outcomes? And so the superintendent adopts those outputs in the form of what we call interim goals. And you see an example of an interim goal here. They're smart, just like the goals are, but the goal is really looking at the end of the cycle, whereas the interim goals are looking what's happening in the middle of the cycle when we still have time to make a difference. Which brings us to the last piece, which is the question you asked me. Because we didn't just learn about outcomes and outputs. We learned about outcomes and outputs and inputs. And so the last piece of the puzzle, inputs, outputs, and outcomes, is the three things that we've talked so much about. Well, now you all are finally in a place where we can start to see all of it come together. And the inputs are, what is this staff going to do to try to accomplish the outputs that will help us accomplish the outcomes? And so the inputs we refer to as initiatives, particularly our initiatives that are aligned to goals and our initiatives that are aligned to guardrails. What are the strategies the school system is going to deploy to try to accomplish the interim goals that will help the district accomplish the goals? And so what is very normal is during the monitoring report, when you see that fourth item, like what's the plan? What is the strategy the superintendent's going to use to try to move the needle? That really lives in the goal-aligned initiatives, in the inputs. So you see three examples here. But if this is a early literacy goal, one of the examples of initiative is coaching. The percentage of target teachers who are teaching targeted first and third graders who are not rated highly effective in literacy instruction, who receive at least 20 hours per month of in-classroom coaching and modeling on literacy instruction from a master teacher or instructional coach, will increase from 0% on the first day of school to 90% by the end of the first semester. And so that tells you what is the strategy, what is one of the strategies, what are the inputs that the superintendent is going to deploy in pursuit of accomplishing the goal. And so it is absolutely appropriate that as part of the monitoring conversation, the superintendent will be revealing, here is some of here's some of the strategy that we'll be using. Here's some of the inputs, the initiatives that we'll be deploying as part of that. And then ideally, you can see over time some amount of conversation, some amount of evidence. But yeah, either these initiatives are working and we're going to double down on these, or so far the evidence suggests these initiatives is not working. And so we're going to keep going with these 5, but this particular one we're going to dial it back. And so that the level of detail, honestly, should not go much below that. So staff, take note. Like, you don't want to dive much deeper into that. I think somebody mentioned earlier, like, we're not here to try to adjudicate on a classroom by classroom basis, or really even on a neighborhood by neighborhood or a school by school basis, but really at a school system level. And so staff don't go overboard with this, but revealing what are the really big bets that the superintendent and staff are making on how will we accomplish the goals is a normal part of that 4th item. That there's not only some evidence, but there's also some insight into what is the superintendent's plan to accomplish it. The board doesn't get to opine on, well, we like your plan or we don't like your plan. That's not the point of this. It is the point that the board should know that the superintendent has one and what it is. That is a meaningful part of the oversight, that the superintendent has a plan. What are the key initiatives that you're going to use to move the needle on this? Is that responsive to your inquiry?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. So it's kind of in their autonomy, but bringing evidence and however that evidence is brought to us is an important component of their work. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the guidance that we often offer is trust but verify. You want to trust your staff that they are executing in good faith, but you certainly want to see some receipts from time to time. What is the evidence, that you all have a plan, that you've been planning for in the deployment of school system resources, and that when you saw that the plan was working, that you leaned into it more. When you saw that a particular initiative wasn't working, that you acknowledge that, even if it was a popular initiative, that you acknowledge that and leaned away from it. That's a critical part of why a board would engage in monitoring, is it creates that accountability to really look at these things with a discerning eye. Other reflections about effective monitoring reports before we transition. Other questions or other reflections about effective monitoring reports? Yeah.
Thank you. I was just gonna ask, sort of like, it feels like in tandem with I'm getting lost on my pages, effective monitoring reports and the calendar. I'm just wondering that I see that each goal needs to be monitored at least 4 times a year. And I'm thinking that inputs, which are strategies, a big investment in theory would be made during budget season, right? Like, that's when those decisions in theory would get made. It's like, what initiatives are we gonna resource? Is there a budget time? And so I guess I wonder if and I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead, I'm just wondering, like, if we collectively decide that we're gonna make investments in the school district in specific strategies that throughout the 4 times a year we're monitoring seem are not working, is it then that we have to kind of wait a year to resource a new initiative to then try something else? Or, like, do we have to go a whole year to realize something's not working? You know what I mean?
Yeah, this is really important. That is absolutely not what you want. One of the things that you'll hear us say over and over is the frequency of monitoring gives rise to the frequency of pivoting. So if you monitor once a year, that means you can pivot once a year. But there is no point in monitoring 4 times a year if you don't want to set yourself up to monitor at least 4 times a year, to pivot at least 4 times a year, if pivoting is what makes sense in that moment. And so your point is well made, that often what's going to happen, in fact, you out here trying to be precocious, and we're going to go off script for a second. It's often the case that what will happen is during the budgeting process, let me go back. So we were going to go over these slides, so we're in the bonus. So here's an example of a slide that the superintendent might show during the budget process. So this isn't during the monitoring conversation. This is during the budget process. So this particular slide shows there's a superintendent saying, hey, look, in 2024, we spent this much money in Department A, B, and C, this much money on initiatives V, W, X, Y, and Z. And we're actually going to abandon some of those initiatives and lower the standard of completion of some of the work some of these departments are doing. And that is going to net us, as you can see down here, it says FY25 disinvestment savings. That's going to net us almost $20 million. So we're going to take, so there's stuff that's currently happening. We're going to do less of it or stop doing it entirely. And that's going to net us some savings. And then with that savings, then the superintendent will go to the next slide. We're going to show you how we're going to strategically adopt and deploy the savings. So we're going to stop doing X, Y, and Z and start doing A, B, and C. And now you can see we took $1 million that used to be deployed by Department B, on Department 2 on Initiative X, and now we're spending that $1 million to try to accomplish Goal 1 through Initiative A. And so you see that last year, 2024, we're going to spend $1 million on this. This year, we're going to spend $3 million on that. And so that is the level of interaction that there is between the goals that you've adopted and the initiatives that you'll be monitoring and the annual budget, is that they should be completely linked up, hand in hand. But just because, and this is to the question you asked, just because the budget funds initiative A, B, C, D, and E, it doesn't mean that you have to just slavishly follow those for an entire year. If the superintendent gets halfway in and says, hey, initiative E, that ain't working at all. It was a good idea, but now we understand, here's some rationale why it's not going to work out. This particular thing that we needed for it, it's not going to work. We're going to stop doing initiative E. We had been spending $3 million on it. We had planned to spend $5.5 million on it. Now we're going to redeploy that into A, B, and C, which are working. Like, that's the level of clarity that monitoring provides, is that you know where your starting point was. Your starting point is your budget. Your budget says this is what we're going to start doing at the beginning of the school year. But as you get into it and you monitor, you want the superintendent to be circumspect about, hey, this ain't working. It's time to transition some of these resources, and for there to be that degree of clarity for the board of here's what it looks like to transition those resources, because you already had that exact same conversation as part of the budget conversation that is now being echoed in the monitoring conversation. But yeah, the value of the monitoring conversation, the monitoring goals 4 times a year, is the frequency. We know where we start. The budget tells us where our starting point is financially. But the frequency of monitoring gives rise to the frequency of pivoting. If the superintendent gets partway into the year, into the first quarter, says, hey, look, initiative A ain't working, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to redeploy resources to initiatives B and D. Now you all have a context for understanding why that's happening, where the money is coming from, where the money is going. This gives the board vastly more insight into are we being good fiduciaries of the community's resources than the board has today? All the pieces come together. Is that responsive to your inquiry?
AJ, can I follow up on that? Because there might be times with some strategies and initiatives that the evidence, the research behind it suggests that it's going to take a little bit longer than like the first reporting period to see those results. So I'm hearing that when the superintendent report comes out, it's explaining where we are with an analysis and a recommendation for continuing on or not with the rationale for that, not just it's the first reporting period, we haven't seen the growth yet, time to ditch this initiative.
Yeah, so there's a distinction between what I was just describing and what you're describing that is important. What you're saying is the superintendent comes back to us in the monitoring report, says we are executing this exactly according to plan, and so far we're exactly where we expect to be, which is that we're in the opening phases. That's perfectly reasonable. What I said was the superintendent said we tried to implement this and we've already failed and we know that's not going to work out, so we're actually going to pivot. Probably a more tangible example is another one of our school systems. One of their initiatives had them relying on their ability to recruit a number. We go come up with some magic money. this particular.
AJ, we lost you for a minute. Can you repeat
and the
that?
moment they knew that, they said, okay, so
I don't
we
think you
thought we
hear
could do
us.
that. We can't afford to do that initiative. We just can't afford these specialists like we thought we could, and the numbers that we would need to make this work. So now we're just going to pivot and move to something else. I would rather than pivot the moment they know that than wait for the entire year.
Right.
But in another scenario, the superintendent said, hey, we've got to hire 10 of these specialists. So far, we've hired 6 of them, which is right on track. By the end of the semester, we think we'll have identified the other 4. And so once all 10 of them are online at the end of the semester, then we'll actually be able to start seeing implementation of the strategy, to its fullness. That is an entirely different scenario. And whichever of those is the case or something else, the board wants the staff to transparently have that conversation. That's what the monitoring is about. That's what that 4th piece of the monitoring report is all about. I feel like there was another hand up or another curiosity about this.
I've had a question. The section on effective monitoring reports doesn't explicitly mention guardrails, but I would assume that these guidelines also apply for reports on guardrails, or are there separate
Yes,
guidelines?
that is insightful on your part. The entire document talks about effective goal monitoring. And once you are really, really good at goal monitoring, you're also good to go on guardrail monitoring. The harder of the two is actually goal monitoring. And so once you hone your skills and you really develop your goal monitoring skills, your guardrail monitoring skills, you've already locked those in. Generally speaking, the harder of the two people often find is getting the goal monitoring really, really, really well done. And so that's why we just focus on that. But yes, and that's why we also recommend that you start with goal monitoring first, and then bring guardrail monitoring online after you've gotten some fluency with goal monitoring. But yeah, it's fundamentally the same skill set.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You had brought up the fact the situation of if something's not working, then superintendent comes back and says, this isn't working, I'm coming back with a new plan. Is this something that you recommend that if something is not working, he comes to us, says it's not working, shows us the data, he may have a plan. Do you think if the board has an opinion on how it should pivot, is that something that's in our kind of purview as well? Say, well, I know we're not the educational experts, and what we say might not apply, might not be what the solution is. But I know there's a lot of people with opinions on the boards and experience, and if something we have suggestions, is that something you feel like we should encourage board participation in solutions to whether that is working or not working?
Yeah, so this is a harder conversation. So, my default response to that most of the time is just, no, that's not really, that's not what the board is here for. And so first let me explain that, but then let me give you the broader answer. The proper way to think about the board's role, isn't one layer above management. The proper way to think about the board's role is it is one layer beneath the community. That is the proper way to think about it. So your job isn't to be, how do I help management? How do I help them think through problems? How do I help them find solutions? Your job is to be, how do I represent the vision and values of these people from whom my authority derives? That is the proper orientation of the board. And so board members often think, I'm here to help management. That's not what you're here to do. You're here to represent the community. These are just two very different jobs. It's not like one is good and one is bad. It's just the one that you happen to sign up for is the one that involves representing the community. And so the board has no obligation to assist the superintendent in doing his job, because that's not your job. That being said, let me take a more nuanced swing at this. It takes a fair amount of maturity for someone to offer a suggestion and not be so tied to that suggestion that they feel some kind of way if the superintendent doesn't take it. Said differently, if you offer the superintendent a suggestion and he's going to get in trouble for not taking it, it was never a suggestion to begin with. And so some people will be like, oh, I just gave the superintendent an idea. No, you didn't. You put a demand on the table. And And so then you gotta ask yourself, is the role of board members to make demands of the superintendent? And I think all of you be like, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. But it takes a certain amount of maturity to say, hey, here's an idea. I have no connection to it. It's something I've heard, I think it's valuable, but it's your call. Whether you do it or don't do it, that's on you, I'm out. And the moment the superintendent doesn't believe that it's advice, that they believe it's a command, then it is a command. Or said differently, I didn't serve in the military, but my brother retired from as a full colonel in the Marine Corps, which basically means he's been through an absurd amount of leadership training. And he's shared with me that one of the key insights in the leadership training that they provide is that advice from above is indistinguishable from a command. That advice from above, when your boss rolls up on you at work and looks you up and down like, oh, you wore them shoes? Like in that moment, in their mind, it sounds like advice, but in your mind, what do it sound like? Yeah, you better not come back to this job site wearing them shoes. Advice from above is indistinguishable from a command. And so that's why I say, the first thing I said is the thing that is accurate. It's like, your job is to represent these people, not to advise these people. But I think there is room, for board members to share information that they come across with the superintendent, as long as they have the maturity to actually treat it like advice. And here's the problem, board. The moment it doesn't feel like advice to the superintendent, then it's not advice. Even if you think that you're giving advice and that they can take it or leave it, the moment the superintendent's like, if I come in here with these shoes next week, I'm probably not going to get my bonus check. The moment that the superintendent doesn't feel like it's advice, then it's not advice, it is a directive. And then as a board, you got to ask yourself, do we want all of our different board members, each individually going and giving a set of directives to the superintendent? If the answer to that is yes, then go forth. But the moment the answer to that is no, then you've got to think, what will be our norms as a board? As we're engaging and monitoring, what will our norms be? Will our norms be that as we see an initiative that seems like it might be struggling, that we offer advice around that? Or do we not offer advice? I think that's something you all are going to have to wrestle with as a board. What do we want our norms to be? But those are the things that are kind of at stake. Those are the things we have to be wrestling with as you make that decision. Is that at all helpful in response to your question? I know that was a little bit longer, but I wanted to give kind of the full context of it so that you all can make the decision and know where you choose to stand as a board. Was there, I can't remember, was there one other question on monitoring reports, or we ready to transition to the next piece?
I just have,
Yeah.
I had just one thought about how the superintendent and board could have a conversation that wouldn't trench on the expertise of the management. And that comes from the very specific examples you gave in your description of what strategies might be. It seems like a lot of the strategies are going to involve money and teachers for improvement. I mean, those are the
Time, talent, and treasure.
right. And so I can see things happening just from the description that you offered in the example of difficulties the superintendent might be having in implementing a strategy because of budget constraints and or collective bargaining constraints. And it might be an opportunity collaboratively for the board and the superintendent to use those moments of monitoring to identify ways in which in the next budget cycle or collective bargaining cycle, there might be strategies that could be deployed through collective bargaining or budgeting that would enable better resources or flexibility in moving teachers around. I know that's maybe not as big an issue in Texas, but certainly the CBA here puts some constraints on what can be done with staff and moving them to different places and terminating them or bringing them back on.
Realistically, every single contract that the district enters into places a constraint on the the administration's flexibility. Because every single contract, 100% of the contracts you have for them to be legal, in some way deploy some amount of the district's time, talent, or treasure.
Right.
And the moment that consideration is on the table and there is a reciprocal obligation for it, you have a contract, that means those resources, that time, talent, and treasure, is now used up by that particular contract, that particular agreement, and consequently can't be used somewhere else.
Right.
So every, the contract you have for peaches, canned peaches that are served, for canned corn, for gray meat, like whatever, every contract that you have constrains some amount of time, talent, or treasure of the organization. And obviously the CBA is no exception to that. And so that what it causes a board to start thinking is like every single agreement that we have takes some amount of flexibility off the table. And so you just have to ask yourself, is this the right can of, like, should we be buying this can of peaches? Now that is a conversation that is going to become more and more real for you as you try to do the work of that slide I showed earlier of, can we wind down some of our existing initiatives so that we can dial up some that are more aligned with our goals, with our community's vision for what students should know and be able to do. Like that is when that conversation that you just highlighted is going to get real. There will be things that you want to do that existing agreements that you have constrain. It's just, that is how contracts work. And so some of those you'll have more flexibility to move. I suspect you could probably change the canned corn contract without a whole lot of problems, without a whole lot of conflict. But other agreements not so easily moved, and they do put a constraint on the organization's flexibility by design. That's not like a negative thing. That's what they're intended to do. That's the whole point of them, is to create that constraint. But it does mean that the time, talent, and resources deployed in place A can't be used in place B without first pulling them back from place A. And that is going to be a conversation that you all have every budget cycle. Is your obligation to your superintendent now is shows that you are increasing the spend year over year on the initiatives that are directly aligned with the goals. That's what those two slides I showed represent. We spending less money in places that are not aligned with the goals so that we can spend more money, more time, talent, and treasure in places that are aligned with the goals. So every budget cycle, that's going to be the conversation. And then a conversation gets revisited every single monitoring report. I thought I saw a hand in the far back.
AJ, question, how often should or could the superintendent come to the board, and this might have been already answered, about a new strategy? What's the council's recommendation on that? If something's not working?
That's we say as soon as the superintendent has really clear evidence convincing them that this is not going to work, that it isn't working, and it's not going to work. Like that workability isn't really on the table. The moment that's true, you don't want the superintendent continue to do stuff that's not working, and you don't want your staff to be continued to subject to the stuff that isn't working. You want there to be some perspicacity about it and a willingness to pivot on demand. And so that is what this looks like. Now, that being said, if the superintendent comes up with 5 initiatives and none of them 5 initiatives work, and superintendent's like everything that we've planned has to change, I think that's probably going to shake the board's confidence in the superintendent's judgment. Like I would expect everything to fail. I would expect some things to work, but I would expect some things to fail. But like if every single thing supposedly works, I'd start to wonder if we play it too safe, and we're leaving kids behind in order to play it safe and look good. And so if everything fails, that's certainly a red flag for me. But if nothing fails, that's also kind of a red flag for me, because that's kind of like if you all set the goals, that we will grow by 0.0001% per year. Like, will you hit that growth rate? Yes, you will. That, however, is a red flag for me. It's like the fact that you hit your goals every single year, that tells me that your goals might have been too easy. And so I'm constantly looking from both directions. Does the superintendent need to make adjustments here and there? Yeah, that's reasonable. If there are no adjustments to be made, I want to hear from the superintendent. Yes, we are confident that all of the things are working as we planned, and we're confident that we're pushing as hard as we can, that we're not seeing results just because we took the easy path, that we're seeing that we are authentically seeing results. Like I need to hear that from the superintendent before I felt comfortable about, oh, wow, everything's working, everything's green. To say this in a different way, and this will help board members a little bit, staff, this will help you probably a lot more than it helps the board. With the last time I had a senior cabinet, I would have them come to me for their regular check-ins, and they'd have a list of the initiatives that each of them were accountable for. And I said, just give me a list of the initiatives and have next to each one either a red dot, a yellow dot, or a green dot. Green means everything's working fine, there's no problems, I can under control. Yellow means things are at risk, and if we don't do something, it's gonna fall off. Red means this is dead, and without you, AJ, making a major decision, it's beyond my authority to fix. And so I want each of my senior cabinet members to come to me with a list of their initiatives during our check-in with a red, yellow, green indicator. I had one employee who showed up, and every single check-in, everything was green. Why was that a red flag for me? Anybody? Why was that a red flag for me?
You're not moving the target. You're not pushing it hard
Be
enough.
ambitious enough.
Yeah, like if everything is perfect, we are talking about children and education, right? Like if everything's going perfectly smooth, I got questions. Meanwhile, one of my top performers routinely would come in and out of 7 initiatives, 4 of them would be green, 2 of them would be yellow, and 1 would be red. And I'd be like, it's clear to me that you are on top of your job, that you know exactly how things are going, what's working, what's not working. The guy who showed up with all green, like, do you actually know what's going on and you are just trying to deceive me, or are you deceived that you don't realize that these aren't all green? Like, those are the things that are going on in my mind. And so when you're monitoring and the superintendent comes back and says, hey, look, these 4 things worked, but these 2 things, these are not working. Like, honestly, that gives me some amount of comfort that my employee actually has a handle of what's going on in reality. But if the superintendent shows up and everything shows that everything is perfectly green every single time, then I better see a miracle at the end of the school year when the scores come back. But normally that to me is a red flag. And so for that reason, I would expect the superintendent to be making adjustments in real time. The moment they were clear that either this isn't working, I'm going to pivot to figure out how to get it to work, or this is not workable and we need to abandon it entirely. The moment that's true, I would want the superintendent to make that pivot and then make us aware of that in the next monitoring report. These are some really intense questions, and I really, really appreciate it. These folks like not only did your homework, but are really being thoughtful about what is our role as a board in effective governance. So I'm really, really enjoying the nature of the inquiry here. Any others? I have one other thought on monitoring reports before we transition. Anybody notice the part about the superintendent's interpretation? Why do we care about the superintendent's opinion of performance? We already have the data, so why do we also need the superintendent's opinion about the data? Why do you think that is? Anybody?
The data doesn't always say everything.
Partially because the data doesn't always tell everything? Absolutely. But why would anybody else, why would we want the superintendent's interpretation of performance if we already have the data in front of us?
You want to know if he understands the data himself.
Yeah, we definitely want to know, does the superintendent know what it means? Like, if all the friend lines are doing this, the superintendent's like, it's great, y'all. I would have some concerns. Like, I want to know, like, what do you think these data means? And so, yeah, it's actually possible. And I've seen a time where the data was all going up and it looked great. And the board is like, yeah, this is fabulous. The superintendent's like, no, actually my interpretation is we're in trouble. And what happened was that there were anomalies in who showed up that particular day. There was reasons that not all students showed up for the assessment. And so essentially you had your highest performing students all took the assessment, and a lot of your lowest performing students did not. And so when the data came back, of course, the data looked, phenomenal. The superintendent's like, no, this is a data irregularity. My interpretation is we are off track, even though the data shows that we're on track. And let me explain to you why. And the data doesn't always tell you everything. You want to know from the superintendent, is a thing that I'm interpreting the data to mean the same thing the superintendent is interpreting the data to mean. That's why you have to have that interpretation. The superintendent has to tell you, is it red, is it yellow, is it green? Or is it on track, is it off track? Like whatever their interpretation is, however they convey it, staff, just be consistent. Like pick a nomenclature or a color scheme or a 5-star rating. I don't know, whatever you can pick. But pick something and stick with it across all your monitoring reports that communicates, usually with a text label or a color label or something. What is the status? What is my interpretation of superintendent, the status of this particular goal? And just pick one, give the board a legend for what they mean, and then use that consistently across all your monitoring reports. Any other reflections or questions before we move on? Other questions or reflections before we move on?
I was just gonna say, AJ, that I could see that being true too for like data that's trending downwards. You know what I mean? If there's something like
Absolutely.
something community-wise that's happening, like I don't know whether it's a big blizzard or a snowstorm like we just had. Like I don't know, I'm just picking attendance because I know it's like an input rather than whatever outcome necessarily, but that matters. You know what I mean? Or if there's like a big, like scare, like maybe there's something happening in the society. Like we recently had like an active shooter at at Brown University. Maybe people are pulling their kids out of school or whatever. Like there are some things that impact student data. Now, if it's all the time, then that's something we got to talk about. But,
yeah, you're absolutely correct. It could go both ways. The data could look really great and the superintendent knows otherwise. The data could look really horrible and the superintendent can know otherwise. This is why you want that interpretation for the superintendent to see, does what our one employee thinks the data means match what we think the data means. It's a really valuable part of the monitoring conversation. Any other reflections before we transition? All right, so the next part of the document we're going to skip over talks about the effective superintendent participation, but I'll leave the superintendent do superintendent work during the superintendent meeting, because this ain't a superintendent meeting, so we don't do it. But superintendent staff, if y'all want to have a superintendent meeting where Cindy and I come back and walk y'all through that section, we're happy to, but we figure you could probably sort it out for yourself. And then even there are key elements of effective board member participation, but honestly, because of the questions you all asked, we've really covered most of these already, just because you all have been asking insightful questions. So we will keep it moving, and we're going to jump all the way down to after goal monitoring to accept the monitoring report or not. So take a moment and jump all the way down to after goal monitoring to accept the monitoring report or not. Read that part, and then we'll talk about it. What's jumping out to you about whether or not the board should accept the monitoring report? What's showing up for you?
I think it's the fact that we vote to accept the report, because the past year that we've been doing this, we kind of just get reports, we listen to it, we do our homework, and then that's really it. There's like follow-up, but it's not, do you accept the report? It's just a report was given to us. So this is a different framework of taking reports and how we claim ownership on reports in our board meetings.
It's also giving you guidance on whether to accept or not, and the guidance and the standards is when you're looking at if everything's on target, then you can accept it. One or two things, you can look at it and try to decide whether you want to accept it or you want to return it. And if the answer is no, then guess what? Turn it back and says, we don't accept this.
But what happened when we don't accept them?
Well, let me jump in right quick. Board members, why does it matter whether you accept it or not? And I'll give you a hint. The answer to that has something to do with something that you read all the way back in How is Goal Monitoring Beneficial? Why does it matter whether you accept the monitoring report or not?
Ultimately, we're accountable.
Because we're doing micro evaluations,
Mhm.
and so it's actually a way to document.
That is exactly what it is. So, if you're a note taker, take this note. If you accept every single monitoring report and they get to the end of the year for the annual evaluation, which is really just an amalgam of all of the monitoring reports from the entire year. So if you accept every single monitoring report and they get to the end of the year, it's like, well, we disagree with the superintendent's performance. That don't add up. Because you've been saying all along, okay, nope, we agree, yep, this is, the data tells us we're on track, or the superintendent's strategy is sufficiently aggressive to get us back on track. Like, if you've agreed every step of the way, and then you get to the end of the year and like, well, now we disagree, something about that don't add up. And so this monitoring that you're spending half of your time doing, it is a formative evaluation of the superintendent. You're spending half of your time every month looking at, is the superintendent putting points on the boards for our kids? And if all year long you said, yep, the superintendent's putting points on the board for the kids, we're solid, and you get to the end of the year for the annual report, annual evaluation, like, well, we ain't solid, that just, that feels like a bait and switch type of scenario. And so, yeah, this absolutely matters, because this is a formative evaluation of the superintendent. In this approach to governing, every single month, you're doing a small piece of evaluating of the superintendent's performance. Are they moving the needle relative to the needs of our students? Or are they at least putting a strategy in place that we believe is going to be sufficient to help move the needle? And so, yeah, whether you accept it or not has significant impacts, implications for your annual evaluation. Other thoughts about why does it matter whether the board accepts the monitoring report or not?
Could I ask for a point of clarification? So if that's not how the board don't. Yeah. Is that all right? Yeah. So just to clarify, does the reality match the vision? I think we hear a little bit more about that, because I could see, on the one hand, reality is absolutely never going to match the vision at the beginning of this process, because otherwise our goals are always a vision beyond like what the realities are, I think, right? So the reality and the vision in that sense aren't ever going to match. But you could also say the reality and the vision are always going to match if you say, well, okay, well, things are terrible, but the reality is terrible, but we were sort of envisioning that it was going to be terrible at the beginning, right? So like, what does that mean exactly with the reality and the vision? What do you mean here by that?
You are absolutely correct. Is that if I was going to be more strictly accurate, the question would be, does the reality match the goal? And so essentially the way to think about this is, the vision is your big picture. The vision is, what do we want to be true for all children? The vision is in fact about 100%. The vision is, what does the community want to be true? What does it want all students to want to be able to do? And then the goals are, what is the next step that as a board we're declaring the school system will take in the direction of the vision? And so that's why the goals typically not 100%, is because the vision says this is what's going to be true for all children. The goal says here's where we are relative to that vision, and here's the next step we're going to take in the direction of accomplishing that vision. And so for that reason, you named it, that when you're doing this well, the goal never quite, the current reality never quite matches the vision, because what we're actually chasing is a goal. And so what is meant here, and now that you pointed out that way and you put a brother on blast, what we might do is upgrade the materials, just to be more clear, is the question that you're really asking isn't literally does the reality match the vision? What you are literally asking is, does the reality match where we expect the goals to be? And so, you know what? I've only been doing this for 15 minutes. You know, I still got stuff to learn.
Okay,
Seriously,
no,
Cindy,
thank you.
like, we're gonna have to talk
That
about if we need to modify that, because I'm
That
just
does-
thinking right now.
does clarify what you.
And look, folks, continuous improvement, everybody. Nobody's exempt. Other questions or reflections on should we accept the monitoring board? And that really is the motion, you know, I move to accept or I move to not accept. And that's it. But notice the language here, we're not saying that you approve or not approve, because the board isn't actually voting on the superintendent's initiatives. You're not, you know, saying, yes, you may do these initiatives, or no, you're not. What you all are making is a performance evaluation, not an operational just judgment call. So to adopt or not adopt is really an operational decision. That's not what's happening here. You're making a performance evaluation. We either accept or we don't accept. Any other reflections on accepting or not accepting the monitoring before we move on?
One thing I would say that I really like about the fact that it's a micro evaluation of the superintendent is honestly, it makes it a lot less vibes dependent. Do you know what I mean? Like, I mean, our superintendent's a vibe, you're a whole vibe for sure, and we appreciate you. But like, I think too much of the conversation can get mad political, where it's like, oh, do you like this person or do you not? It's like, it doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter. Are they doing the job or are they not? And then it holds us accountable to be about quantifiable evidence instead of just vibes or people's personal opinion or politics or all this extra stupid stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we've run into this as we've done this work. I'm thinking of two districts, I actually mentioned this in the book. I'm thinking of two districts. In one district, the board hated the superintendent. Board members would literally roll up on me like, hey, AJ, when we go get this cat out of here? Like, can we fire him tonight? It's night too soon? Can we get rid of him tonight? And the question I would always ask the board members when they asked me this was,
Performance.
how we doing? And folks, you know, the answer is almost always going to be, how we do student outcomes. Some of us do that. All right, and so that's the question I'd ask. Oh, how are we doing on the student outcomes? What are we doing relative to the goals? And the board is like, man, I knew you was going to ask about these kids. Like, well, yes, that's kind of your job too. And you seem dejected because even though the board members hated the superintendent, and to be fair, this person had a personality kind of like a rock, so I can understand that. But they kept putting points on the boards for kids. And so, like, I felt like the board members were literally like, man, I hope these kids can't read next year so we can fire the superintendent. But that was the message. Like, no, hey, look, I'm here for the children. Well, what are you here for? And so if the children are getting what they deserve, then I don't know what to tell you. Simultaneously, we had another district that we coached. And in this district, the board loved the superintendent. But what am I about to say? But there was no progress being made on the goals. And so the board checked in, he's like, AJ, what are we supposed to do? And I looked at her, I was like, well, you tell me. And so the board ultimately wound up working with the superintendent, and, you know, had a very, very smooth transition. You know, didn't put nobody on blast, wasn't nasty or ugly, but there was a transition. And the board intentionally sought out a superintendent. Like they were laser focused on who will have the skills necessary to move the needle on these goals for student outcomes. And that's the superintendent they've hired, and they are in fact now, you know, making progress. And the board hated doing that because of how much they love the superintendent. And the superintendent is, you know, a great person. Like if you knew who I was talking about, if they were in the room with you, you'd be like, man, this is a great human. It is not about, is it somebody we like or don't like? It's about, are we getting educational justice for the children we serve? That's what it has to be about. And so in this approach to school board governance, that becomes the central focus. Are we putting points on the boards for students? Are we getting justice for children for whom public education may be the last safety net that they rely on? That has to be the deciding factor of one of the more key decisions the board makes. And in this approach to school board governance, the data is the data. And so the second the superintendent and the team are putting points on the board for kids, like you can feel some kind of way about the superintendent. You are entitled. But the question of do they stay or do they go has already been answered in that. Any other reflections before we move on?
Just one comment, legally, that would put a very particular superintendent evaluation in the mix. Because typically evaluations of superintendents include data points that don't pertain to outcomes. For example, relations with the community, efficacy in working with the union, things like that. How would the evaluation instrument need to be changed in order to, is there a particular evaluation instrument that is very specific to this governance model?
Absolutely. In the, I think both in the manual, but also we can provide it to you separately. We have very specific templates that we offer folks, but there's nothing magical about the templates. Like here's the superintendent's evaluation instrument, goals and guardrails. Done. Hey, there you go. That's it. That's the whole thing. There's nothing else. There's not, well, did they wear the right color of outfit? Did they show up at the right number of baseball games? And by the way, these are legitimate criteria that we've watched boards terminate superintendents over. I literally had a board be like, well, he didn't go to enough baseball games, so obviously he ain't for the children. It's like, oh, hold up, look. In this approach to governing, the board says what matters most is are we getting educational justice for children? The goals. That's what matters most. Are we accomplishing, are we making progress in the direction of the community's vision? That's what matters most. And then are we honoring the community's values, the guardrails? And so those two things together, that's it. That is the entire superintendent evaluation. There are no other components. There's no vibe check. There's no, how do I feel about the superintendent? Like the reality is, folks, when it comes to serving children, your feelings are not the best test for reality. And so you've already put a test for reality in place. You call it the goals as it relates to the community's vision. And you've already put a test for reality in place. We call it the guardrails that represent the community's values. That is the superintendent's evaluation. There isn't a separate, you would never say the district is performing like this, but the superintendent's doing a great job. You would never say the district is doing like this, the superintendent's doing a horrible job. Like in this framework, superintendent performance is indistinguishable from school system performance. They are the exact same thing. Either the system is performing relative to the goals and guardrails or it's not. And that is the superintendent evaluation.
One final question, I think this was Ben's question. If we don't accept the report, what happens then?
Then you don't accept it, you move on to the next item of business.
Does he come back and bring a new report? Is there any follow-up?
Superintendent is welcome to do so. If I was superintendent, I would probably be like, hey, I noticed that this did not get accepted, and I just want y'all to know I received that, and here's some of the things I'm working on. But the actual thing that happens next is that somebody adds that to the minutes, and you move on to the next item of business. But yes, a clever superintendent will hear that, oh, okay, so what our performance is not satisfactory to the board on a formative basis. I'd rather know that right now in February than wait and be surprised in September. And so now that I know that in February, let me go ahead and make some adjustments and then communicate that back to the board so they know that I am being responsive. However, notice our recommendation is often, if the board has serious concerns the first few times, maybe table the matter, like, superintendent, this don't feel like it's ready for prime time. Would you like some more time to work on this? And so I try to extend some grace initially. I wouldn't like just jump to that. Like if you feel like in your first 3 or 4 monitoring reports, like we can't accept this, I would use that as a calibration period and just send it back to superintendents like, here's some things that we're uneasy about. Like either we just don't understand it, maybe you need to explain it more clearly for us, or maybe this just ain't clear. But I treat the first handful or so like a calibration process. But if you've extended that grace and we just continue not to, I mean, this is a formative evaluation of the superintendent. if, at some point, you will have to treat it accordingly. All right, and on that cheery note, we move to our last item of conversation for the evening, for which you will need something to write on and something to write with. And so the last thing that we're going to look at is when we're having this monitoring conversation, and we've been dancing all around it, but we haven't actually talked about what happens in the conversation. So what we're going to do is we invite you to consider that there are effective questions that you might ask during a monitoring conversation, and there are ineffective questions you might ask during a monitoring conversation. And so we often use 5 indicators that conveniently spell the acronym SMART. Is the question strategy focused? Is the question measure focused? Is the question ask oriented? Is the question results focused? Is the question time bound? And when those things are true, when all those things are true, we say it's an effective question to ask during a monitoring conversation. And when only some of those things are true, it's probably still effective. But if none of those things are true, it is definitely an ineffective question to be asking during a monitoring conversation. So what I want to do is I want to give you an opportunity to practice writing effective and ineffective monitoring questions. And so let's do one together. Let's do an effective question together. And then I'm going to ask each of you to work independently and try to come up with no more than 1 to 3 effective questions, examples of effective questions, and 1 to 3 examples of ineffective questions. But first, let's do one together. So let's say I ask the question, Superintendent, how come you don't care about the children?
Ineffective.
Is that effective or ineffective?
Ineffective.
Superintendent, why don't you care about the children? Okay, so why is it ineffective? So you have these 5 criteria, and so the thing to ask, Superintendent, why don't you care about the children? Is that strategy focused? Is that focused on questions about strategic issues that are in the monitoring report rather than other issues? Yes or no? Is that question strategic? Yes or no?
No.
Yeah, it's not really strategy focused. I'm not really highlighting in the monitoring report a strategy the superintendent's pursuing. I'm clearly just offering my opinion about the superintendent. Is it measure focused? Is it focused on data that's referenced in the monitoring report? No, definitely not. It's not measure focused. Is it ask oriented? Is it a yes, no question, or is it open ended? Superintendent, why don't you care about the children? It's open ended. Okay. Okay. So far we are 1/5 effective.
That's not a question. That's a statement. That is a statement.
Superintendent, why don't you care about the children? That is a question, and it's not a yes/no question. It's not a statement. So I say it's not strategy focused. It's not measure focused. I'd say it is ask oriented. Results focused. Is the question focused on understanding data rather than sharing an opinion? No, it is clearly opinionated. And then finally, time bound. Is it looking at past performance and past actions, or is it looking at future performance and future actions? Superintendent, why don't you care about the children?
Let's start the past.
Yeah, that's really past focused. So the 5 indicators, I say it meets 2 of the 5 indicators. So I give it a 40%. Does that sound effective or ineffective? That sounds like an ineffective question. But notice it's not ineffective just because it's my opinion it's ineffective. It's ineffective because it fails to meet, it only meets 2 out of the 5 criteria. So what I want you to do now is I want you to write no more than 3 questions that are effective, that meet all 5 criteria. And I want you to write no more than 3 questions that are ineffective, that fail all 5 criteria, which is actually a little bit harder than it sounds sometimes. And so that's what I want you to do is on paper, everybody, staff, you're in on this. I want to see your pencils moving too, because anybody can be called on. Nobody's safe. I can see you, people. I can see you. And so draft no more than 3 effective questions to meet all 5 indicators. Draft no more than 3 ineffective questions that fail all 5 indicators. What questions do you have about this activity? All right, go to work. we'll give you, you'll take your list, so we'll give you about 10 minutes to work. So we'll reconvene in about 10 minutes, a little under 10 minutes.
AJ, are we just using any example, or was there?
Yeah, any examples?
Okay.
Yeah, definitely think about any of the conversations you've had around your TAP lately, the academic elements of your TAP. Feel free to use that for inspiration, but it can really be about anything. Especially the ineffective ones, they can truly be about anything.
policy monitoring.
Yeah.
Do you think we could just ask them to set it? And then we can talk to them? Would that be okay?
How are folks doing on time? Folks, need more time or you about winding down? You said you're done?
Almost.
All right, let's take about 2 more minutes, then we'll start recording now.
Nothing.
All right. Who will be the first to share? Who will be the very first to share? Let's start with effective. Who will give the first example of an effective monitoring question that meets all 5? And we'll be listening to see, and I want everybody listening to see, does it meet all 5 criteria? So who will give the first example of an effective monitoring question?
I can go. I guess I'll go.
All right.
Let's see. I hear that we're off track on goal 2. What specific strategies will the district invest in over the next 3 months to see improvements? And will we need to redeploy resources to make these investments?
All right, so I think I heard something like, I hear we're off track on goal 2. What specific strategies will the district invest in over the next 3 months to see improvements? And will we need to move resources? Did I hear that?
Yes.
What did I miss?
Yes, that was it.
Okay, I hear that we're off track on goal 2. What specific strategies will the district invest in over the next 3 months to see improvements when we need to move resources? All right, folks, so we're gonna go down the list. The first question is that strategy focused? Is that focused on strategic issues rather than technical or tactical issues? Is that strategy focused? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Why do you say yes?
Because it specifically asks what strategy do you plan to use? What strategy do you plan to use? For what?
Yeah, and so I'm actually with you on this case. She makes it kind of easy because she uses the word strategy, but do not be fooled, because I can come up with plenty of questions that have the word strategy in them that are hella not strategic. And so in this case, I agree. I think it actually does work. It feels like a strategic question. It's focused the level of strategy rather than the level of tactics or being a technical question about technicalities. But just because it has the word strategy in it does not mean that will always be true. There's some sneaky questions out here. All right, so that's strategy focused. The next one is it measure focused. Is it actually focused on data that's mentioned in the monitoring report or not?
Yes.
Why do you say yes?
Well, I'm assuming that when she says I hear, she's saying, meaning I hear in your report that you just just gave. that-
Yeah.
It's not, I heard on the street on the way in.
Okay, what Twitter's saying.
A little burden.
What the streets say. Yeah, no, I'm with you. I would infer from this that she's saying that what I'm hearing in a monitoring report, specifically about goal 2, and what specifically did I say about goal 2, that your interpretations were off track. All of that suggests that she's referencing specific data that's in the monitoring report. So I would say, yeah, it's absolutely measure focused. Is it ask oriented? Is it an open-ended question or a yes, no, multiple choice question? Is this ask oriented, yes or no?
Yes.
Let me read it one more time. I hear that we're off track on goal 2. What specific strategies will this district invest in over the next 3 months to see improvements, and will we need to move resources?
You're asking two things. You're asking one about moving the resources, and also, if you read it again, it was the sentence before the resources. Can you read that one again?
It's both.
Okay, so here's the issue. We have actually 2 questions in one.
Yeah,
So
that's what I'm
let
saying.
this be a major lesson to everybody. Typically avoid the compound questions. Board members, we'd be the worst ones. We'd be messed around and asked 15 questions and then stunned that we didn't get a straight answer to no. And so board members, we will be the worst ones out here. And so the pro tip on this one is don't ask compound questions. Just ask one question. And then ask a follow-up question. And so if I was coaching this, I'd say, ask the first question, what specific strategies will this invest in over the next few months to see improvements? And then the superintendent will answer that. And then what might the follow-up question be that isn't a yes, no question? What might the follow-up question be?
With the money,
The
resources.
How will the superintendent be moving resources to accomplish these?
Yeah, how will you be moving the resources to accomplish this? Or what support will you need from the board regarding resources to accomplish this? Yeah, absolutely. All right, so that's ask oriented. S for strategy focused, M for measure focused, A for ask oriented, R for results oriented. Results oriented, is it actually focused on the data in the monitoring report, or is it focused on offering an opinion? Is this one results oriented?
Yes.
Why do you say yes?
She asked specifically for regarding the data and the monitoring report.
Does it feel like she's offering an opinion or a recommendation? No, so board members get real slick on this one and be like, superintendent, how come you didn't buy pencils for my cousin Ray Ray? And really what that is a low-key recommendation. You better go buy Ray Ray's pencils.
Not very low key.
And so sometimes we'll ask questions that ain't really questions, but this one actually sounds like it's results oriented. It actually is legitimately a question that's trying to understand the data, not make a recommendation. And then the last one is it time bound? And what time bound is this looking at past action? Because remember, if we're monitoring, you can't monitor the future, folks. So the only thing you can really monitor is what's already happened. And so the question, and you can monitor right up to the present moment. And so the question of time bound is this looking at past action, present action, or is this talking about future action? Is this one time bound, yes or no?
It's about futures.
Is this one time bound, yes or no?
Well, it's a tough, I think that's a tough question because you can ask somebody, what are you planning on doing about this? Obviously, what they're planning is going to be happening in the future, but you're not asking them are you asking, if you're really asking about like what will happen in the future, then it's not. But if you're asking them, what are you planning as of tonight to do about this?
That's
asking about the present.
So both versions of your question are effectively future focused. They're asking about action that will take place beyond the moment in time of the monitoring report. So the monitoring report is in your hands, and I'm assuming it's in paper, so it is written. So anything that is beyond the time imprint of that piece of paper in your hands is future focused. Anything that's on that paper or that happened before is past focus. So this question is definitively not time bound. This is clearly talking about what will happen in the future. Now, that's not a bad thing. We're not suggesting it is. Notice there are 5 indicators. And if you get 4 of them and you start asking about future focused things, that's still 80 out of 100 points. Would you consider that effective?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would too. And so it's not that there's a problem with asking future-oriented questions. It's that this is a monitoring conversation. And so you want the majority of the conversation to be monitoring, where are we and how did we get here? And only at the very end, with like the last 10% of your 10% of your time, do you want to be digging into, okay, what happens next? People, are action junkies. They want to spend all the time on what are we going to do, what are we going to do, what are we going to do, but never really analyze what worked and what didn't work, and what did we learn, and how did we pivot based on that. Those are the things you really want to dig into. You want to understand where are we and how did we get here. You want to understand that at a deep level. That way, when you do get to the question what happens next, you'll have the context for does that make sense or not. And so the majority of your question, majority of your conversation, like 75, 80, 90% of your conversation needs to be looking backwards on where are we, how did we get here, how do we know what worked, what didn't work, how do we know that, what's our evidence about that, and have a deep understanding about the data. And only then would you spend the last few moments looking forward. I think it's attributed to Einstein, but I don't know if that's true or not. It said if I had 20 minutes to solve a problem, I spend the first 15 minutes defining the problem, the last 5 minutes, coming up with a solution. It's this idea that you really want to analyze. If you're a carpenter, they say measure twice, cut once. Like that's the thinking here, is we want to get deeply clear about what is true in the moment before we start speculating about what's going to happen in the future. And so this question, I think, met 60%, got 3 out of 5, which is pretty good, but with some very minor tweaks. Could you offer us those tweaks right now? Go ahead and make the 2 tweaks. Just have the one question instead of 2, the one that is ask oriented, it's open-ended, and then make it past and present focus rather than future focus. Go ahead and read a 100% effective version of the question.
If I'm cutting out let me cut out the last one. So I have, I hear that we're off track on goal 2.
Mm-hmm.
What specific strategies did you enact? Did you enact? And what did you learn?
Yeah. What strategies did you invest in over the last 3 months to see improvements, and what did you learn? And in that moment, we have a fully effective question. Can we give some snaps up? Our first fully effective question. Yeah, this is the nature of the work. And by the way, this is what it looks like. What will happen is you'll come up with a bunch of questions, and some of them will be fully effective, some will be fully ineffective, but mostly they'll be in the middle. And either you all can work with each other and go through the same process, like, hey, let's iron sharpen iron, so that when I come to the board meeting, all my questions are fully effective. Or if you want, you can always call us, and we'll gladly either meet with you in advance, or you can email us your questions. A lot of board members across the country do that. They'll email us with questions like, hey, how are these as smart as I think they are? Can you help me tighten these up a little bit? And so we'll do some back and forth with folks. I literally, right before we jumped on today, I was doing that with another board. Their board chair and vice chair both sent some questions like, hey, help us tighten these up. We want these to be fully effective and not partially effective. Let's pause for a second. What did you all take away from this process? As we were analyzing that question to figure out if it was how effective it was, and then you heard some tweaks made to it to get to full effectiveness. Before we transition, before we move on, because we're about to close out, what did you learn? What did you notice? What did you take away from this process of practicing for the first time of trying to develop effective monitoring questions? What did you learn, and what did you take away?
The iterative process. You might not
Yeah,
have
it's going to be
perfect the first time, but try to get out what you want to say, and then kind of use this framework to make it the most appropriate and helpful question possible.
Yeah, this is continuous improvement, folks. There's nothing wrong. That first pancake often comes out looking janky. But that second pancake, you know what I'm talking about. And so this is nature of continuous improvement. It's just, you get a little bit stronger, a little bit stronger each one. Yeah, continuous improvement. Anybody else? What'd you take away?
I mean, as the person kind of going through it, I think I'm continuously learning something about the way I communicate, which is always past, present, and future in one sentence, and I wonder why people get confused. And it's just a life thing I keep noticing at working with kids, so I have to just tighten it up, period. But I also think that I keep realizing that futurism, while beautiful, can be a form of escapism from the present. And that's the thing that it's like, how do I sit in what is happening and what has happened to learn and to not escape to planning and futurism? Because that's easy to do because there's not really an accountability there in that moment. And so how do we sit with what happened and really reflect and then move to planning?
Accountability doesn't live in the future. These accountability conversations live in the past. They're grounded in truth, and you don't know what the truth of the future is. So if you're going to be grounded in truth, the only way to be grounded in truth is we're talking about what has happened and bring us to this point, and let's deepen our understanding of that. But people don't want to stand in truth; they want to stand in opinion. They want to stand in grandstanding. The invitation here is stand in truth, like actually understand what is working and not working for our children. Where is educational justice finding them and where is it not finding them? That's the nature of the work. Before we close out, does somebody have a fully ineffective question? Does somebody have a fully ineffective question they want to offer? If not, I'll gladly offer one, but does somebody have a fully ineffective question? You know it ain't right.
I got one.
Yes.
All
All right, so I saw a poll in the Projo that said that 50% of parents don't like iReady. Since it's your fault that we chose that vendor, will you cancel that contract, yes or no?
Trifling on all 5 counts. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. It is definitely not strategy focused, definitely not measure focused. Didn't mention nothing in the monitoring report. It's talking about what the streets say. It wasn't ask oriented. It's definitely yes, no. It wasn't result oriented. It was definitely giving opinions. It wasn't time bound. It's asked about tomorrow. Completely ineffective monitoring question. And here's the thing. We actually aren't opposed to completely ineffective monitoring questions. They can be very entertaining. We do recommend that you don't ask them before people. So if you want to be ineffective, do that on your own time. Don't do that on the board time. That's all. We've reached the end of our time, and so I certainly want to be respectful to make sure that we get you all rolling as anticipated. Any closing comments or reflections on this deep dive into monitoring? Yeah.
Does this pertain to all committee meetings? So should I go into CTE kind of thinking about this framework as well, or just board meetings?
This framework, this SMART framework of questions is definitely dialed in for monitoring. So when you're trying to create accountability between the board and the superintendent and monitoring reports, that is what this is dialed in for. However, a lot of our boards have found that this is useful pretty much anytime they're interacting with the superintendent, that this tends to help them get better data and better information out of the superintendent and staff than that type of shady question that was asked just a second ago. And so this isn't designed to be for all things. It's really only designed for monitoring. But you will probably pick up that actually there are pieces of this, just like you said a second ago, like this could help you talk about kids probably. Like there are aspects of this that might be useful in other areas.
Thank you. Question, kind of bouncing off the court center. We had our policy meeting last week and we're looking at creating our policy monitoring calendar. Is that something that we could set up time with yourself and Cindy to focus just
Absolutely.
on policy?
Now, as it relates to policies, there was one chunk of policies that you all already worked on. Have those been adopted yet?
Yes, so we created a list, so we didn't work on them. What we did is we went through all of our policies, divided what is superintendent work, what is board work. And so we're at the portion right now where we're
divvying those policies away and figuring out what we're doing, and reviewing, rewriting what we're gonna do with our board own policies. And so part of that is creating a calendar of like how we going to monitor those policies that we're now rewriting and creating.
Yeah, and definitely adding that calendar into the larger monitoring calendar, I think makes all the sense of the world. Because essentially the monitoring calendar, what you're realizing, it's not just monitoring the superintendent, it's actually also monitoring us, like, are we doing the things we said we would do? And so I think that makes perfect sense. But I also want to make sure that if you all have not adopted it yet, that you just figure out when you're going to calendarize. There was a set of policies that you had us work on for you around just kind of board operating norms.
Yes.
And has that full set been adopted?
No, I've been working closely on the attorney who's been working closely, that they're on the schedule to be drafted. The policy committee has to do the work of taking your suggestions, some of which they're going to use, some of which they're not going to use, and putting it into a formal policy. And that is supposed to happen and should be happening over the next month or so, those very top level policies that you described. I think the question that was asked about monitoring is really a question not just about the calendar, but about what that really is. I was drafting for the board policy committee that part of the policy, and I didn't fully understand what that looks like. And I'm not sure the board does either, or the policy committee does either. So we were just hoping to maybe get a little instructional training from you about what that really means.
So what specifically really means?
What does it mean to monitor a policy?
Oh, got you. So there are a couple things that you, on a regular basis, want to verify, about the policy. And let's see, not surprisingly, like pretty much everything else, we have a guidance document for this as well. And so I'll make sure to send this out so that you all can circulate it around effective policy leadership. But when we're talking about monitoring the policies, there's just really a few key things that you want to dial into. Every so often you want to come back and ask a question like, is this still, the right policy? Is it still relevant? Does it still make sense, to keep it? And, things of that nature. You don't want to just kind of let that slide. But you also, frequently want to come back and ask, like, is this, something that we own? Is it something the superintendent owns? So that's a question that you kind of never fully let go of. You also want to ask, is this still, a top priority, for the board, or is this a priority, that can be handed over to the superintendent? Those are the types of questions. So we've got a full document on effective policy leadership, and it lines out what are all the sort of things during this regular policy monitoring of your policies to figure out, is this still the right policy? Is it still relevant? That is separate from that is a separate process from the goal monitoring, for example. And so I'll send this document. It'll give you a kind of a big picture idea of what we mean by taking time to go through and review all the policies at least once every term of a board member. So you have 4-year terms?
Appointed by the mayor, elected.
Staggered. It's staggered. It's not.
So what's the shortest term? What's the longest term?
1 year is the shortest with an appointment from the mayor, and then it goes 2, 3, and then elected are 4.
Okay, well then I would ignore the appointed. I'd stick to 4. Because that just makes more sense. You're not going to get them all in 1 year. That just doesn't make sense for you all. You do nothing else. You definitely wouldn't be focused on student outcomes. So I'd look at every 4 years, how do we just review all the policies in our manual, every 4 years. And after you've done some amount of the review that you're on right now, where you'll delegate some of it back to the superintendent, instead of having this many, ideally you'll only have this many to work with, and that will be manageable. If you were trying to do that with this many, you would not be focused on student outcomes, because that's all you would do. But when you get it down to a more manageable size, then you really can do that every 4 years without it taking much effort. But like I said, I'll share this document with you, and that'll help give you some pointers, and then we can always join any committee that you want us to join to talk about it more.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, AJ. Just as a note, everyone, Tyrell had to step out for work, so I'm gonna jump in and just get us to the next steps, items 3.2 next steps, and then move us to adjournment. AJ and Cindy, would you mind, as we move to 3.2 next steps, do you have any, in terms of us actually drafting a monitoring calendar, what are those next steps?
The very next step belongs to the superintendent. The superintendent will have to take all the interim goals, all the interim guardrails, and lay them out in a calendar. It is your calendar, the board's calendar, it's not the superintendent's calendar. But the superintendent should take the first draft at putting all the interim goals and interim guardrails on there, just because the superintendent's team knows when data is available, and they'll have to go through the headache-inducing process, sorry staff, of trying to figure out how do we make sure that we're monitoring each of these goals 4 times a year and monitoring the guardrails once a year. Like it'll be a whole thing. Staff will hate me for a while. They'll take Cindy's name in vain, but they'll figure it out. And then once they have a rough draft, then they'll bring that back to the board. And then the board, you all can do the work of plugging in once you see how work is organized on there, you all can move things around, and then you can add in other things like your own leadership trainings and your own self-evaluations and things of that nature. But the very first next step belongs to the superintendent staff to come back with a rough draft monitoring calendar. It has each goal monitored at least 4 times per year and each guardrail monitored at least once. And staff, not surprisingly, we're happy to provide technical support on that.
Thank you so much. Okay, so what I have for next steps are thank you so much, AJ. Superintendent and team will take the first swing at creating a draft calendar that's directly related to the interim goals and guardrails. Then from there, the board would take that information, review, add our own stuff in terms of trainings and evaluations and community-led sessions. You probably at some point pass that to you all to give a final glance and give us some technical assistance. And then separate from that process, but related, what I have is if there's committees of specific technical assistance that's needed, such as policy committee questions, we can reach out to you and schedule something specific for that. That sounds good. Does that sound good, everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay. So let's move to item 4.1. Do I have a motion to
Motion to
adjourn?
close.
All right, second. Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Everyone say thank you to AJ and Cindy. Thank you so much. Thank you, Martha, for getting us tonight. Everybody, thank you so much.
Yeah, I wrote that.
Andrew, so nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you all.
Happy to have you. Yeah, absolutely.
Andrew, so you're from that 1 year? 3, right? And I think what happened was